Well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it!
Let's go! CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
Lawmakers are racing against the clock to pass a new government spending bill before current funding expires.
Republicans see it as an opportunity to hold us hostage.
I think for some of my colleagues in Congress, it's easy for us in the cheap seats to say, I would have gotten a better deal.
They hold Mr. Whalen differently because of these espionage charges.
We get overrun every day by the cartels, the criminals, the drugs, the fentanyls, the human trafficking.
I'm confident that the country will get it right come 2024.
Another presidential race on the horizon. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with Capitol Hill on a deadline. Lawmakers are racing to pass a government spending bill before current funding expires Friday night. Democrats and Republicans are struggling to agree on that price tag for the 2023 spending bill. The Senate is also working through another must-pass item, which is the National Defense Authorization Act, which the House passed last week. And with WNBA star Brittany Griner now back in the U.S., officials are still working to secure the release of retired Marine Paul Whelan. The White House held a planning meeting today to discuss the next steps in that case. And for more on this, let's bring in Scott McFarland and Nancy Cordes. Scott, of course, is CBS News congressional correspondent here with me at the desk, and Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent coming to us from the North Lawn. Scott, I want to start with you and this funding bill set to expire by Friday. Nothing inspires Congress like a deadline. Are they going to meet it? What are the latest hang-ups?
There's no expectation of a shutdown, at least not yet. There's also no piece of paper circulating with an exact top-line number or details of how to avert a government shutdown. But this is becoming a holiday tradition and a pretty awful one. Congress uses those deadlines to exact some concessions, exact some leverage over people who don't want to vote for things otherwise. So we'll see that deadline of Friday likely kicked, maybe even closer to Christmas. The top Republican on the committee that has oversight of this told me this might be a Christmas Eve thing, so keep that in play. But this is the type of thing we've seen in holidays past, but I'll add the asterisk, as you and Nancy recall. It was Christmas 2018 in which the threat of a shutdown was, in fact, a shutdown. And the Congress that began January 3rd, 2019 began in a shutdown, so it's not out of the question.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that we'll get to that point? Republicans are saying, why don't we wait till do a short-term bill, wait till next year when we've got some leverage in the House?
It's understandable they'd want to do that because that's something they can use as a negotiating tool. But with one-party control of the U.S. Congress, hard to see how it gets to a shutdown before January 3rd.
Okay. Nancy, I want to go to you because over the weekend we had some lawmakers talking about the latest news that happened over the weekend, which was that Kyrsten Sinema, who is the senator from Arizona, announced that she is changing her party registration to an independent. Take a listen to what some lawmakers said as a reaction.
Kyrsten Sinema is a friend of mine. We work well together. I respect her decision. She made it, and she'll give I think she gave pretty good reasons of why, and I can tell you the people of the United States are very upset. West Virginia is upset. They don't like the bickering that goes on. They want unity.
Look, I was surprised she made the change, but functionally, I don't think that change is a thing. I think we're going to continue doing the same thing that we were doing, whether she's an independent or part of the Democratic caucus, because she's going to continue to caucus with the Democrats.
It's probably a lot to do with politics back in Arizona. I think the Democrats there are not all that enthusiastic about somebody who helped sabotage some of the most important legislation that protects the interests of working families.
So, Nancy, you heard Senator Tester there saying that this doesn't fundamentally change things in the Senate. But just last week, President Biden was celebrating the idea that Warnock won in Georgia, giving a more robust majority for Democrats. How do you think Biden is going to navigate this now that Sinema has announced her intentions?
There's no question that it stings, Caitlin. Anytime a member of your party moves further away from that party apparatus, particularly in a closely divided Senate like this one. White House officials are trying to put the best face possible on this. What I've been hearing when I talk to them one-on-one is something similar to what you heard there from Senator Bernie Sanders. They say this has more to do with electoral politics back home in Arizona than it has to do with them. The fact is, they say that Kyrsten Sinema would have faced a very difficult primary in 2 years for re-election, and by becoming an independent, she sidesteps all of that. They argue that they have learned how to work with Senator Kyrsten Sinema over the past few years out of necessity. They don't expect her to side with them on everything. They expect that that will continue to be a challenging relationship, but they don't believe, at least they claim, they don't believe it'll be any more challenging going forward than it has been already.
And Scott, Nancy brings up the fact that Sinema is up for re-election in 2024. A couple of those other lawmakers that you heard from, Tester is also up in 2024. Joe Manchin is up in 2024. And he told our colleague Jack Turman today on Capitol Hill that, when asked if he would switch parties, he said, I'm not making any decisions now. Who knows? You cover Capitol Hill. What kind of practical implication does this have? And is there a threat of some of these other lawmakers looking at what Sinema did and taking note?
Doesn't seem like it's going to change the political complexion of the Senate for the 118th Congress, but it really does underscore what not just Kyrsten Sinema, John Tester, and Joe Manchin face, but look at all the other uphill climbs Democrats face to keep that majority in 2024. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, not to mention whatever steep uphill climb Joe Manchin would need to climb again, as he's done in the past, in a state that was overwhelmingly pro-Trump in 2020. All that being said, Kyrsten Sinema has chosen a way, or plotted a way, to try to thread a needle. John Tester, Joe Manchin will have to find their own path, but we know there are regular, if not continuing, overtures to Joe Manchin to switch parties. That he hasn't done so far is likely an indication he's not going to do so in the near future either.
That's a good point. And another reason Democrats are glad that Warnock won that Senate race in Georgia. Nancy, I want to switch topics a little bit because the other big news, of course, is kind of the fallout from that prisoner swap with Brittany Griner and the idea that Paul Whelan is still in Russia. Has there been any movement or any answers about what the administration is trying to do to secure his release?
Well, the administration certainly wants to make it clear that they are working on that, even if there haven't been any breakthroughs of note. Administration officials held a meeting today to discuss the next steps in their efforts to get Paul Whelan released. It's complicated by the fact that they don't appear to have any Russian in U.S. custody that the Russians are eager to get back, so eager that they'd be willing to trade another American in Russian custody. So today in the White House briefing room, I asked the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, about that and about the fact that the State Department said today that they're going to try to be creative when it comes to figuring out ways to broker Whelan's release. I asked him what they mean by creative. Here's his response.
We have various ways that we are working through solutions, and we will be endeavoring on a daily basis from the president on down to finally develop a formula that works.
I asked him if he's implying that perhaps if the U.S. doesn't have a prisoner that Russia wants, if there's some kind of policy change that the U.S. might be willing to make in exchange for getting Whelan back, lifting sanctions, for example. He said if you're talking about any policy change having to do with Ukraine, the answer is no. The U.S. is not going to do that. But the universe of options here is not tremendously large. And so we're going to continue to watch this. The administration says it is in regular contact with the Whelan family. The Whelan family confirms that. But as far as concrete next steps that we can report, we're still waiting and watching.
And Nancy, former President Trump said over the weekend that he turned down an offer to release Whelan. What more do we know about that? I know some former administration officials have weighed in.
Right. This was very interesting because you have heard criticism and concern from chiefly from Republicans, but even from Democrats about the fact that this was, in their view, a lopsided exchange. You had Brittany Griner, who was found with a trace amount of cannabis oil in her luggage. She was exchanged for Victor Bout, who was a notorious arms dealer who was in the middle of serving a 25-year prison sentence in the U.S. for conspiring to kill Americans. They say that is a lopsided deal, and it incentivizes Russia and other bad actors into taking more Americans hostage for the very same reason. Then you had the former president chiming in over the weekend in a post on social media saying that he had the opportunity to trade Paul Whelan for Victor Bout, this arms dealer, and he decided against it because Bout was responsible for killing so many people. Then we got some pushback from Fiona Hill, who, as you know, is a Russia expert. She served in President Trump's administration. She was on Face the Nation. She said, actually, the reason that a deal like that never happened was because the former president wasn't all that interested in Paul Whelan's case. And so in a bit of a back and forth between the former president and some of his aides who say that's not exactly the way that it went.
All right, a lot to monitor on these developments moving forward. Scott McFarland here at the desk and Nancy Cordes on the North Lawn. Thank you so much. And a drug crisis has skyrocketed across the U.S., impacting millions of Americans. Now, a new investigation is diving into how previous administrations repeatedly failed to tackle the fentanyl epidemic. We'll speak to one of the reporters behind that story after the break. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future?
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
When weather turns extreme.
States from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
Oh! You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it.
CBS Mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it! Let's go!
CBS Mornings, starting at 7. Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. As a shocking amount of fentanyl continues to pour into the United States, a new Washington Post investigation focuses on the political mistakes from recent administrations in dealing with this epidemic. Headlined, "Cause of Death: Washington faltered as fentanyl gripped America," is the first in a 7-part series on this crisis. In the piece, the authors detail how recent presidential administrations have failed to slow down the devastating impact of fentanyl on Americans. Nick Miroff is one of those authors of this story and joins me now. He's an immigration reporter for the Washington Post. Nick, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here and for your reporting. I encourage viewers to go back and read it. What was striking to me here is that you reported that essentially this is a crisis and an issue that has spanned a couple of administrations. What exactly has gone wrong? What have they failed to do?
Well, really, it's been an accumulation of failures and missteps that go all the way back to the George W. Bush administration, but have really gotten worse in recent years. And it's the result of the U.S. institutions that are designed to confront illegal narcotics, like the DEA, the Department of Homeland Security at the border, as well as the White House drug czar. All of these offices have been slow to respond to this growing catastrophe. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is just an explosion in the amount of fentanyl coming into the country, as well as a huge increase in the number of fatal overdoses.
And Nick, you mentioned that in your reporting that the HHS isn't tracking the rise in fentanyl here, and you write that the government is essentially driving blind when it comes to this. There was a notable quote here from John Walters, who served as the drug czar in the Clinton and Bush administrations, and he said this is like tracking the epidemic by visiting cemeteries. Our drug control strategy is an embarrassment, and it doesn't begin to propose a way of reversing this problem. So how can the federal government tackle this issue if it can't seem to actually get its arms around it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the story of the most lethal narcotics crisis in U.S. history. And instead of rising to meet the challenge, sadly, what we've seen is that these institutions have come up short. I think people are starting to wake up to the gravity of this crisis, of this epidemic. We have seen a new commitment from the Biden administration, particularly at the DEA, to really make fentanyl a focus of its efforts. I think, but I think we're in a time right now when all of these institutions are catching up. They've realized that this is such an urgent threat, but we're behind. It's going to take several years, and right now there isn't much of a light at the end of the tunnel. And almost everyone we spoke to for this investigative series feels that the matter is going to get worse before it could get better.
And you mentioned the DEA. You also mentioned in your report that there are about 800 vacancies there. Why is this agency having so much trouble filling these posts? Is it a problem of recruitment?
Well, there's just been a lot of turmoil at the DEA really throughout the course of, during this time that fentanyl was really increasing. It was only until last year that the DEA finally had a Senate-confirmed leader. Before that, they had 5 acting administrators. Hundreds of agents and staffers left the agency. There have been a series of corruption scandals, but also the DEA, like many federal agencies, is really struggling with recruitment and retention. A lot of experienced agents have left, and they're behind, and they know they're behind. They say they're doing more to try to bring in new agents. But, again, the agency, in the face of this very, very big challenge, hasn't been able to meet it. So that's one of the institutional failures we outline in our series.
And did you get a sense from your reporting about ways that this current administration can address this issue? Are they starting to meet the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, their strategy today, I do think we've seen a renewed effort recently. They're trying to detect more fentanyl at the border by increasing scanning technology. There's a greater focus on the 2 Mexican cartels that are responsible for the vast majority of fentanyl trafficking. But relations with Mexico remain strained, particularly on this drug partnership. And then on the health front, I think there's a real desire to make more treatment available. There's new grant money, but all of these institutions are essentially playing catch up. And what we've seen is just the number of fatal overdoses has soared, particularly since the pandemic. I'll just give you one stat. Since 2019, fatal overdoses from fentanyl in the United States are up 94%. So it's very hard for the government to catch up to an incredible wave like that.
Yeah, that's absolutely striking. I mean, being on Capitol Hill, too, you hear lawmakers, talk about this and the need to address it. Many Republicans are talking about border security, but I know in your reporting, you kind of get to the fact that doesn't necessarily address the issue when lawmakers are talking about building a wall. What's kind of gone wrong there at the border in terms of how people are addressing it policy-wise?
Well, one of the missteps we outline is that during the last administration, the government spent $11 billion on the border wall, but a wall is virtually useless for stopping fentanyl trafficking because the vast majority of this illegal fentanyl that's being smuggled by the cartels is coming through passenger vehicles and trucks right through the official ports of entry. So it's a question of detection and of scanning. And the federal government is years behind its efforts to ramp up the kind of sophisticated scanning technology needed in order to detect more of this fentanyl. So the Biden administration has rolled out new scanners in a lot of places years after it was supposed to. So it's playing catch up. But again, a border wall is not very useful for stopping something that is coming in trucks and passenger vehicles.
All right, that's important to consider as Capitol Hill grapples with this as well. Nick Miroff, thank you for your reporting, and we'll look forward to future installments. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Anytime.
And 2022 isn't over yet, but we're already wondering who will be on the 2024 presidential ballot. After the break, we're taking a closer look at where former Vice President Mike Pence may stand in that debate. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. These migrants, they've been released. Explain the status that allows them to be released, to slow things down a little bit. What are the big sets of questions for China and its ambitions? Hackers are stepping up their attacks to extort victims. Let's start with easy. Who's attacking? Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely. As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
states from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we
unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be.
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women. What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done? We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. Former President Donald Trump is the only official candidate for the 2024 presidential cycle so far, but we can already take hints of who might be running against him based on where they're traveling or what they're talking about. That includes former Vice President Mike Pence, who finds himself in New Hampshire tonight. Amid all the speculation, Pence has visited several important primary states in recent weeks on his book tour. Since his book came out last month, he's already been to Nevada and South Carolina, along with a stop at the Reagan Library in California. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins me now with more. Bob, good to see you. So nobody goes to New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina entirely by accident. Pence is on a book tour, but does it look kind of like the beginnings of a presidential campaign, or is he kind of using this to test the waters a little bit and see what kind of reception he's getting?
Caitlin, actions tell the story in politics. When you look at the menu of the map of Pence's book tour, you don't see Idaho, you don't see Kansas. Where's South Dakota? But Nevada, Iowa, New Hampshire now tonight, they're all getting visits from the former vice president. He is moving toward a possible run for the Republican nomination. But Pence, like so many right now in the GOP field, they're taking their time. They're going to talk to their families, talk to their friends, talk to their donors, and they're waiting to see what happens with former President Trump, legally and politically.
Yeah, a lot of conversations happening over holiday dinners in the coming weeks. I'm also curious about Ron DeSantis, because he's someone that comes up over and over again. He's calling a new special session in the legislature today. And also, you know, his legislature is likely to address at some point next year whether or not they can reverse a law to let him run for president at the same time. A current law says you have to resign to be able to run. What are you hearing about kind of what he's doing? Is he kind of head down in his work, having just been reelected as governor? He seems to be someone that people are talking about, or at least wanting to be interested in.
He won by 19 points in his re-election race, and so some of his allies tell CBS News behind the scenes that he's going to get through the spring, have his legislative session, and then make a decision. And he's going to see if some of the biggest donors in the party, some of the key stakeholders in Congress, whether they come to him, come visit him in Tallahassee, ask him to run. See if there's a groundswell for a DeSantis campaign. There's already a super PAC called Ready for Ron, being run by Ed Rollins, the former Reagan advisor, sometimes ran a Trump super PAC. So you have a lot of dynamics out there where they're not only waiting to see what Trump does and how his campaign goes, but what does DeSantis do. But those who are lower tier are not going to wait for DeSantis to make a final decision. Lower tier in terms of polling and public recognition of their political ambition. They're likely to get in the coming few months, test the waters, knowing that, of course, DeSantis could try to get in May or June or July. But a lot of people are going to perhaps get in because they're wondering, does DeSantis want to truly get in this race, knowing that if he runs against Trump, he has to have all of the consequence of that run. It's not just running for president, you're running against Trump, and that means it's likely to be a rough race.
Yeah, that's a whole other dynamic, and it'll be interesting to see where donors go over the next couple of months. That might give us an indication of kind of who they're getting behind. I want to talk to you a little bit about politics here in Washington and Republicans. We had Marjorie Taylor Greene saying some controversial statements at a Young Republicans dinner, essentially, you know, talking about ways in which Democrats have said that she's responsible for the January 6th insurrection. election. She said that she was being sarcastic when she said that if it were up to Steve Bannon and her, that they would have gotten the job done and they would have been armed. Take that for face value. But this also, to me, kind of indicates that this is something that Kevin McCarthy is going to have to continue to grapple with a slim majority, with her kind of having an outsized influence. How are Republicans taking those statements that she made?
Well, it's not just the statements that are going to hover over the new Republican majority. In just a few weeks, the House Select Committee investigating January 6 will release its report. They have investigated at times and talked about the conducts of certain members of Congress who are Republicans. Yeah. Steve Bannon, who Congresswoman Taylor Greene referenced in her statement, he's a major part of the January 6 story. At the Willard Hotel with Rudy Giuliani on January 5th, 2021, stoking talk of overturning the election on his podcast and television and radio program in the weeks before January 6th. And they still have a place inside of this Republican Party. You see people like Carrie Lake. Who was she turning to in the final weeks of her campaign as a strategist? Steve Bannon. And so Bannon is a presence in the GOP, even if some don't want him to be.
Yeah, and that January 6th report coming imminently. We'll see what else comes out of that. Bob Costa, thank you for your time, as always. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
An original